welcome to Dr. Hannah Ryan, clinical psychologist, and I'd say a very special person in that Hannah is living with her own chronic balance disorder. So over to you, Hannah, and
Brilliant.
everyone sit back and relax. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kevin. Can I just check, is my screen sharing okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to bring this up. I realize that I'm going to be quite small in the corner of the screen. I hope that's okay. Thank you so much for the introduction, Kevin. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a joy to be here, and it's a really beautiful introduction as well to what it's like to live with a balance disorder that really resonates with me. And I think there's a real overlap in some of the things that you've said actually, and some of the things that I'm going to say today. So yeah, as Kevin said, I'm a psychologist, but I'm also a human being. Before that, and I'm someone who lives with a chronic balance disorder. I guess what I'm going to say is that today you'll kind of see me in my professional self. You'll see me at my most kind of capable and competent in that I'm going to be talking about my work and something I'm really passionate about, which is compassion focused therapy and bringing that to people with balance disorders. But um, we all know that our conditions can be really invisible, and even as I talk to you today, I'm going to be experiencing some rocking sensations and some vestibular symptoms. You'll notice I've got my trusty light blocking glasses, so I just want to name that as well. Okay, let's get going. So I always think it's quite grounding to have an idea of what we're going to cover. So today I want to tell you a little bit more about who I am and a bit about my story and my journey, which is definitely not over. It's probably a journey I'll be on for the rest of my life in some way or another. I want to speak more to what Kevin has just talked about, really, which you all know already, but I guess it's about making it explicit, which is why we really, really need compassion as people with balance disorders and start thinking about how we can actually access it when we're so kind of deprived of it from other people. I want to also think a little bit about the vestibular system, anxiety in the brain, which is probably the most technical aspect of the presentation. So the nerds among us will probably enjoy that, and the rest of you will just have to stomach it. But I guess the reason I'm bringing you through that part is that a really key message in compassion focused work is that anyone in your brain and body would feel similarly. Anyone in your brain and body would struggle similarly. And that's really different to some of the messages we get from the medical community or from the world around us when we have balance disorders. And so I want to go into some of the kind of brain science behind why we might struggle with anxiety when our vestibular system is active and why it's really not our fault, but we can do something about it. I want to talk about speaking to ourselves with kindness during a flare up. And I guess more importantly, why it can be so difficult to do that as well. And then we'll just have some sort of closing thoughts before we go into the Q&A. Oops, I've skipped forward. So just some thoughts for reflection. I guess I do some teaching, and I always kind of prefer to feel like when I'm teaching, I'm kind of talking with people rather than at people. Unfortunately, we kind of have to keep some of the questions to the end, because if I kept sort of stopping and asking, hearing people's questions, we would probably be here all day and you all have lives to get back to. But I would really like for this to feel more like a conversation and like a two-way dialogue as much as possible. So I would invite you to reflect during the presentation. I'd invite you to share your thoughts in the chat. I might not see all of it. I'll hopefully see some of it, and I'm sure Kelly can flag some of it to me. And I'll hear some of your thoughts in the Q&A. But I wanted to start with a couple of thoughts for you to reflect on. And some of this might bring up some difficult feelings. That's okay. We can think about that together. But I guess the first thought for reflection is, what words come to mind for you when you think about your relationship with your body before your vestibular disorder, your chronic vestibular disorder, and after you developed your chronic vestibular disorder or balance disorder? And what words come to mind for you when you think about your relationship with your body during a particularly difficult flare-up? So I can give you a moment to sort of think about that for yourselves, but as you're doing so, I guess if you're anything like me, during a flare-up, you might have quite a difficult relationship with your body. You might feel really frustrated that your body is not doing the things that you really want it to do. You might feel really angry at your body for not being like the bodies of your peers or the way it was before. You might feel really frightened of your body and some of the symptoms that are showing up for you, and you might feel lots of difficult feelings towards it. And I guess I want to invite you to just consider what it would be like if you could develop a different relationship to your body, one in which it didn't feel like the enemy. So I guess a thought I want to leave you with is, what would it feel like if, when your body was struggling, your instinct was to soothe it like a caring parent rather than scold it like an angry one? And that's not something we're going to get to all the time. I don't think it's realistic to think that we can respond with compassion to our bodies every day or every time we have a flare up. We're human. But I wonder what it would be like if we had a commitment to respond to our bodies in that way. And if anyone wants to post anything in the chat, please go ahead. Okay, I'm going to share a little bit about me and my story. I've tried when I was thinking about what to say to keep this brief, but it's really difficult because it feels like such a long and meandering journey. I guess I'm tempted to say that my journey began when I was 27. That's when I guess acquired my chronic balance disorder. A diagnosis came later, as I'm sure it did for many of you. But when I think back, my journey with vestibular difficulties probably started much earlier than that. This picture is not a picture of me in the throes of difficulties with balance, but I will come to the context of it and will explain it at a different point. So yeah, when I think back, I definitely had some, I guess, predisposition to some vestibular. Oh, I think there's maybe somebody who's off mute there. I'm getting some feedback. Yeah, I had some difficulties with vestibular issues when I was younger that maybe predisposed me in some way. So I know that when I was a child, I had an episode where I felt like I was falling through the sky, and I was taken to A&E, and I was sort of diagnosed with an atypical migraine that kind of came and went without incident. When I was 17, I had my first episode of BPPV. I'm sure that most of you here have had an experience of that. For me, it was kind of getting out of bed and just crashing into the wall and experiencing that every time I tilted my head, the world would tilt with me. The room spinning, feeling very nauseous, at times vomiting. And that was quite straightforward for me because the doctors knew what it was and they could give me some tablets, and it seemed to resolve within 10 days or so. The first time that happened was when I was 17, and that seemed okay because it came and went. But then it happened four more times in my 20s. And the last time it happened when I was 25 was so severe that I remember being kind of brought to my knees with it, where I just couldn't move my head at all without everything spinning so badly. And I remember sort of propping up my head with towels and trying to type an essay for my master's whilst kind of tears were streaming down my face and just it being a really low point. And after that, I remember my balance was never quite the same. And I started getting symptoms between episodes. But the real kind of before and after moment happened for me when I was 27. So I was going through quite a period of stress anyway. It was the first year of my training as a psychologist, and I was really thrown in at the deep end. But I had gone home for Christmas to Ireland, and I had spent some time playing with my niece, who was 3 years old. Her mum had said, you know, she has hand, foot, and mouth disease. And I remember thinking, oh, that's probably something that kids have. It's probably not contagious. And I remember coming back to the UK and waking up with blisters all over my body, inside my throat, and being really sick. And and it really kind of floored me. And after that sort of resolved, which took a really long time, I remember waking up and feeling like I had BPPV again, and it felt like a familiar issue, except it sort of never went away after that. And there was a moment where I realized that this had turned into something very, very different. And it was about 3 weeks after I'd been really, really sick, where I stepped outside my flat. I was living in Angel in North London at the time, and it was a kind of sunny October day, a bit like it is now. And I remember just feeling this kind of piercing sunlight coming towards me. And it just felt like I was, Superman, and it was kryptonite. It felt like the sun just pierced my whole body. And I experienced this light sensitivity that I'd never had before because I'd never had a classic migraine. And I just had these shooting pains through my eyes. The world spun. I fell over. I had to sort of inch my way back to my flat. And I had no idea what was happening to me. From there, I had so many weird and wonderful symptoms that I couldn't really name. I didn't really have a language for them. I was so terrified of being kicked off my doctorate course that I just kind of pushed through. I remember going to my GP and he just didn't know what to do with me. He kind of treated me as if I was a bit crazy and if I was as if I was sort of exaggerating when in I was so scared to tell him the reality of what was going on. Half my body was going numb. I felt like I was being pulled to one side. I had so many strange things happening. I was losing my vision. I was getting this aura. Um, and I would only tell him some of that, but he just didn't know what to do. And I don't think, had the confidence or the humility to say, I don't know, but I'm going to try and help you. So I felt really alone and I felt really ashamed. And I started to kind of believe that maybe I was just sort of going crazy and having a sort of weird stress response. And I remember one of the worst days, I was in a clinic with a client and my supervisor, and it was just coming to the end of the session, and there was a kind of breeze coming through the window, and there was some peripheral movement of the blind that sort of in my peripheral vision. And at that moment, what happened in my body was just really overwhelming. It felt like there was a sort of firework went off in front of my eyes. I went numb on my left side. I felt like I was going to fall off my seat. And I just started experiencing this rocking, like I was on my own boat. And I remember my supervisor saying, Hannah, can you walk this lady to the door? And I just, in that moment, remember thinking, like, this is it. I'm gonna stand up, but when I stand up, I'm gonna pass out or something terrible is gonna happen. It's impossible that they're not gonna see what's happening on the inside because I must be having some sort of serious episode. I didn't know what was happening, but I was like, there's no way they're not going to tell what's happening to me. And it felt like an out of body experience. It felt like my body just sort of lifted me up, walked me and that woman to the door. And I kind of walked myself back, went to the disabled bathroom, which of course I felt like an imposter in using. And I remember lying down on the floor of the disabled bathroom while the room spun and I spun and just thinking, this is it. My dreams are over. I'm not going to make it through my doctorate. My dreams are down the pan. I did not know what was happening to me. I thought I must be having some sort of physical breakdown, mental breakdown, maybe both. And it was really probably one of the lowest points of my life. And I didn't have any language to name what was happening to me or to understand what I was going through. Um, it's a lot to recount it actually. And I guess fast forwarding a few months later, I found myself to a woman. I don't even know how I found her. I was Googling. I found myself to a woman who was a vestibular physiotherapist. I had to take the day off my placement. And I remember it took me about 2 hours to get into central London because my fatigue was so bad. I remember thinking, I'm 27 and I feel like I'm 97 years old. I had to keep stopping every 10 minutes, holding on to things, and I just couldn't explain the debilitating fatigue. It felt like I had the worst flu of my life. And I remember after kind of 10 minutes of telling her what I was going through, her kind of saying, I'm pretty sure you have vestibular migraine. And I'm sure some of you have had that feeling when somebody tells you your diagnosis or tells you what you have. I had this kind of knowing that rose up within me where I just knew that what she was saying was true. And strangely, I had actually started telling work that I was having migraines. It was like my body knew that it was vestibular migraine before I knew myself. Maybe because every woman on my mother's side of the family almost has had migraines, but obviously they have headaches. But my mother had always talked about losing her vision, and I had been getting these migraine auras. So the only way I could tell work what was happening was to say, I'm having really significant migraines, and that was all I could think to say. And of course, I thought I was lying. I thought I was making it up. But I think looking back, that my body sort of knew that there was something migrainey about what was happening. So it was such a huge relief. And thankfully, my mom has come a really long way, and I've worked really hard to educate her. But I remember ringing her and saying, I think I have vestibular migraine. And her response was, "You're so lucky you don't get headaches." And just that moment was so difficult, because I just thought, I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy. And I'm sure some of you have had that experience of thinking, if you could just walk a day in my shoes, you wouldn't be saying that. So, it's a difficult story, but thankfully I'm so much further along now, and I kind of had to fight my way through getting my qualification, and it really felt like a fight. I would say that I learned the word ableism, which I didn't know before, to my shame. I knew the word sexism very well as a woman, as I'm sure all of the other women here know. I knew the word racism very well. Something I really took pride in educating myself about, but I really learned what it meant to be discriminated against. As somebody with an invisible disability, which I, of course, felt like an imposter, even using the language of disability. And the way I've come to terms with that is to say that I don't even really identify as being permanently disabled, because there are times when I feel quite able-bodied in some respects. But what I do know is that in certain environments, I'm not going to name those environments, but in certain work environments that were completely fluorescently lit, or that required me to fit a certain mold, those contexts completely disabled me. And I needed to use the language of disability to get my needs met. And I was really met with just abject hostility and lack of compassion and a complete unwillingness to meet my reasonable accommodations most of the time. And it left me with a lot of difficult feelings coming out of that, honestly. But I battled through, and I got my qualification. And it was tough, and I'm proud of myself. And thankfully, I'm in such a better place now. But it's not a journey that can be kind of wrapped up in a neat bow. I'm sure that all of you can relate to this, and some of you who are on at a place where you're in a better place, you will know that with a vestibular disorder, you kind of get lulled into a false sense of security. You go through a few months where you think, "Oh my God, I'm cured." And then you get struck down again. So you're seeing me now the best I've ever been, but I've kind of been in good places before, and then I've had months of being quite bad again. Um, but I'm sharing this image, which I hope isn't too upsetting for people. I guess I'm sharing this image because I didn't get to travel very much when I was kind of in the throes of my vestibular stuff. And this year, I sort of hit on a combination of multiple medications, multiple supplements, multiple treatments that really helped me. And I managed to go to Alaska and go on a wildlife cruise, which was amazing. So I just wanted to share that to give people a little bit of hope. Okay, so that's my story. Okay, so I will come back to my experiences throughout the rest of the presentation, but talking about referencing my story and what Kevin has just talked about, I guess what I really want to emphasize throughout this presentation is why people with balance disorders need compassion. And I hope everything we've already talked about today just makes that really, really obvious. So these are kind of facetious questions. You don't have to put your hands up, but I guess I'm inviting to if you want to. You know, the question I want to ask you is hands up who got a bunch of flowers or some home cooked meals the last time they were debilitated with their condition. Yeah, I don't see any hands flying in the air. Hands up who feels like living with a balance disorder could be a little bit harder. It's just not enough of a challenging life. And they feel like it's all a bit too easy. Okay. Hands up who feels like they have too much understanding from their friends, families, or employers. It's just a bit suffocating. It's annoying. It's at this point, it's irritating. It's too much. Okay. Yeah. So hands are not flying in the air. And that's really sad. And I just want to tell you a story. So my mom rang me recently and she's great and she lives in Ireland where there's great community support for people with certain conditions at least. And she was telling me about her friend. I won't name her friend's name, but let's call her friend Linda. And she said, "Oh my God, it's awful. Linda has to go for a knee operation." And I said, "Oh my God, that's terrible. You know, how's she doing?" And she said, "Well, you know, Linda loves her walks, and that's such a big part of her value system. And she's not going to be able to go walking for 6 weeks." And so we've all rallied round and we set up a WhatsApp group, and we're going to drive her to and from the hospital every day. We've made a rota. Some people are going to cook her meals, some people are going to come and visit her. And, you know, she loves reading. So we're just going to go and do a book drive, and we're just going to really lift her spirits until she comes out the other side of this. And I'm going to be really honest, I felt that's amazing. But there was a part of me that thought, wow, I know so many people with balance disorders who are debilitated for not 6 weeks, but 6 years, and they don't get a single cooked meal or a book delivered to their door. And that's kind of heartbreaking, you know? So I guess just to kind of emphasize what Kevin was saying, you know, there is such a huge disparity between how debilitating balance disorders can be, how much suffering we go through, and how much we lose a sense of being in touch with our values. And there's so much loss there. You know, that woman, Linda, was losing a sense of her values over 6 weeks. People with balance disorders can lose a sense of their values over a much longer period than that, and it can go completely unrecognized. So that sense of having an invisible disability, the word invisible kind of has a double meaning, right? Because it's invisible in the sense that many of us are not in a wheelchair. Some people might use walking sticks, but it's invisible in that people can't see the physical illness. We're not covered in rashes. It's not on the outside. But it's also invisible in that our suffering tends to be invisible to other people. And even when we point it out, it tends to be misunderstood. So I know that when friends have asked me about my health condition sometimes, and this is not to throw shade on my friends, I think it's just the nature of maybe how difficult it is to understand our conditions. I've sort of gone to great lengths and I've explained, and then I will meet them again and they'll say, "Oh, have you had any headaches recently?" And I will go, I'm baffled because I don't get headaches. And I'll try and explain that. And then it's, you know, what's the point? So it just feels impossible for people to understand because maybe there's not any publicity around conditions like Meniere's, vestibular migraine, triple PD, and people just don't have a kind of empathy or the imagination for what it's like to live inside a body with a balance disorder. And I kind of think I sort of have symptoms like every day. It's all the time, and I don't have headaches, and you know, it's too hard to explain. But I guess the bottom line is that what I want to say is that giving compassion to ourselves cannot replace our primary needs for care, support, and understanding from other people. And that would be a whole other presentation. It's beyond the scope of what I can go into here. I know it's kind of regularly discussed. How do we try and elicit care from other people? Should it even be our responsibility to elicit care and take on that emotional labor? You know, I know a lot of us have tried to give books to people they haven't read it, and we've tried to explain they haven't understood. It's exhausting doing that emotional labor. That is something for another day, or we can talk about it as well in the Q&A. I'm not going to talk about that today. What I am going to talk about though is that humans are wired to internalize our external world. That's why we have words like internalized racism, internalized sexism, internalized homophobia, right? And the language that I want to introduce to some of you today, if you're not already familiar with it, is internalized ableism. And when we internalize the gaslighting, the hostility, the blame, the doubt, the criticism, the lack of compassion, or just the absence, right? You know, for me, often it's not words of cruelty, but it's just the kind of the absence where compassion should be. When we take that in from the world around us, this can become like a second illness. It perpetuates our suffering and it compounds our mental distress. I'm sure a lot of you can relate to that, to sort of, you know, people treating you like you're crazy, and then maybe you treating yourself like maybe I am crazy. People treating you like you're lazy, and then you treating yourself like you're lazy too. And people don't even need to say it in words, it can be implied, but you take it in and then you imply it towards yourself as well. So the bottom line here is life with a vestibular imbalance disorder is hard. And learning to unlearn the harmful invalidation we've internalized can help to disrupt this cycle. It can't completely disrupt it, but it can go some of the way. That's what I want to talk about today. So, what is self-compassion? What is compassion even? This is where I want to invite you to do some thinking about what your conceptions are, what your preconceptions are. You know, what are the images, what are the words, what are the thoughts that come to mind when you think about compassion? You know, but I will look at in a second. I guess I want you to think also about what are your positive connotations with compassion? Words like kindness, warmth, I don't know, images of particular people might come up. What are your negative images of compassion and self-compassion? What are your confusions about what it is? So you might have judgments come up like, that's just self-pity, or that's just self-indulgent, that's letting yourself off the hook, that's letting yourself do whatever you want, okay? You might have positive and negative connotations. I'm just gonna check the chat to see if anyone, so I know that people are sharing their stories. Um, yeah, so I just want to name some of the things people are saying. So things like, are you better yet? Or have you tried lavender oil? Yeah. So have you tried yoga? Have you tried magnesium? I'm basically a walking magnesium tablet at the moment. Um, and someone else has said, I've had to move in with my dad, and he's constantly implying that my situation is worse because I'm not trying harder. Yeah. And then I bet you turn that on yourself as well, and feel like you're not trying hard enough too. I'm so sorry to hear that. It's hard not to believe that yourself when it's all you're hearing, of course. How could you not believe it? Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, thank you. And someone's just said that there's confusion. I get that. So compassion, what even is it? I'm going to talk a little bit about what we think it is as psychologists anyway. I'm going to share a few ideas, a few images here to stimulate our thoughts about what compassion can look like. It may look like different things to different people, just to kind of get our thinking going. But ultimately, I guess what we've come up with, or the best we've come up with as psychologists, is that compassion is really a quality of how we relate to ourselves and other people. It's not something we can embody all of the time. It's something we can strive towards. And I'm sure that if any of us have been watching the news this week, we'll be realizing that we live in a world in which compassion is really, really hard to come by. So the definition that we have in the kind of literature is that compassion is a sensitivity to the suffering of self and others, combined with a warmth, kindness, and motivation to reduce or ease that suffering with connection. So that's something we want to try and help you connect with and turn towards yourself. Of course, you will see that in that definition, that's something that's really, really hard to come by in the balance community from other people. And if you've got less of it in the external world, it's going to be really hard to draw on that and give it to yourself as well. I'm going to also talk about three components we think that there are to self-compassion, because if you understand these components, it can be easier to kind of access this in the moment, or we think it can. So the first component is mindfulness. I know you've had a speaker already. Some of you might have attended that on mindfulness. When I talk about mindfulness, I don't mean just sitting down and doing a guided meditation exercise, which some people might think of that. That's one way of accessing mindfulness. Again, what I mean is a kind of quality of how we relate to our thoughts, a quality of how we relate to our feelings, a quality of how we relate to our physical sensations. Okay, so I guess it's an ability to observe our thoughts, feelings, and sensations from our observer self with a bit of space and distance and without judgment. It's also a willingness to notice suffering, to turn towards it, and to tolerate it. So if you think of a teacher in a playground and two children come up to her, and maybe one she has a very uncompassionate response to, and one she has a very compassionate response to, maybe on two different days, maybe she's feeling very stressed one day and less the other day. Imagine the child comes up to her that she's not compassionate towards. She might say, oh, come on, you've been here so many times. Come on now, this is too much. Just go and play, okay? So there's a dismissing of suffering, there's a pushing of it away. There's not a willingness to move towards it, to be present with it, to be curious about what's going on with it. The day that she's maybe feeling a bit differently, that child might come up to her and she might say, her tone might be different. She might be curious. She might move towards, she might crouch down with that child. She might say, what's going on? What happened? Tell me what's happened. Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay. That's a different way of relating to ourselves that brings a sense of moving towards. Similarly, if distress comes up and we push it away, we're scrolling on our phones, we're not moving towards it, we're not really mindful, we're kind of fused with it, we're not observing it. This one's quite tricky. So it's about also resisting the urge to sort of magnify it or attach stories to it about what it might become or what it was in the past. So we're all prone to this, especially in a flare up. So it was kind of like me lying on the floor in that disabled toilet thinking my hopes and dreams are down the pan. I'm never going to qualify as a psychologist. No one's going to help me. No one's going to support me. Some of those thoughts might be true. Some of those thoughts might not have been true. It turns out I did qualify as a psychologist. Some people didn't support me, some people did. It's not about challenging the truthfulness of those in the moment, but it's about noticing that stories are coming up and gaining some space from that so that you're not living that as your reality. So, what you might say is you might put the words, I'm noticing that in front of the thought. So, you can say something like, I'm noticing that I've got these stories coming up about the fact that I'm going to fail. I'm noticing that I've got these stories coming up about the fact that no one's going to help me. I'm just going to let those come and go for today because I'm feeling very triggered. Okay. It's kind of a noticing and a letting go. Quite tricky. If you don't understand all of this right now, don't worry too much about it. The second component is called shared humanity, and that is probably the core principle of what Kevin was just talking about, which is why this group has been set up. And when we are very far away from compassion for ourselves and others, we feel so alone in our suffering. That's why support groups like this have such a powerful role in showing us that we're not alone, that there are other people in the same situation. And one way that we can really access compassion or reduce our suffering in the moment is remembering that we're actually not alone, even when we feel like we're alone. So we're all prone to that, right? If we're at home in our beds and we experience overwhelming vertigo or an overwhelming symptom and huge anxiety, we kind of have this tendency as humans to sort of feel like we're the only one in the world feeling that symptom in that moment. We're the only one in the world reacting to it in that way. We're the only one in the world feeling anxious about it. And that kind of compounds our suffering because that aloneness really makes it worse. So, what we can do is kind of remember that all around the world, there are so many people with vestibular disorders experiencing suffering in not the exact same way, but in similar ways. So, you might say to yourself something like, I'm noticing I've got vertigo right now. I know I'm not the only one, even if I feel like I'm the only one. And we know from the research that that can just bring down our suffering a little bit. So I really like the kind of metaphor of we're all in the same boat with vestibular stuff, because my over the years my strongest symptom has been rocking on my own little boat, and often that feels like it's just me. But when I Google kind of vestibular disorders, I know that other people are rocking on their boats as well, and that kind of comforts me, even though I would never wish that on anyone else. But I also really like this quote, which kind of emphasizes privilege. So it says, you know, we're not all in the same boat, we are in the same storm. Some have yachts, some have canoes, and some are drowning. What I really like about that is that it acknowledges that, for one thing, we're all at different points in our journeys. And for another thing, we all have different levels of privilege. And so I want to take this moment to acknowledge that I have huge amounts of privilege, which have really helped me to get to the point that I am in my journey. And I have different kinds of privilege. I have the privilege of, for example, you know, having lots of access to knowledge of psychological tools that I could apply to myself, when lots of other people would have to go on NHS waiting lists to be able to access that. That's why I want to share that with you today. I more importantly had the privilege of being able to access private medical care, which is huge. And I know that other people were not able to access that. And it meant that I was able to get a diagnosis within the space of a year rather than within the space of multiple years, once I figured out what was wrong with me and found the right expert. So I want to name that we all have different levels of privilege. And if you're comparing yourself to somebody else's story, just remember that that person might have more privilege than you. Okay, the third component is the one that you might be more familiar with, which is self-directed warmth and kindness. And I just want to remind you again that this is all about that quality of how you relate to yourself and finding a way to sort of access that kind of space of self-compassion. So you can go through the motions of running a bath, for example, but you can be getting into that bath saying things like, oh, why am I even having that bath? I don't even deserve this. I'm being so lazy. I should be doing my laundry right now. And we've been conditioned by social media and things like that to think that, you know, having a bath equals self-care. And I just want to emphasize that the action doesn't equal the self-care. It's the quality of how you do that. So if you get into that bath and you think, I really deserve to soothe myself right now, I deserve to take this time for myself, I'm going to really slow down, I'm going to play some music, I really deserve to let myself have this time, that might meet the criteria for self-care, but it's all about how you're relating to yourself whilst you're performing that action. Okay, I hope that makes some kind of sense. Um, yeah. So here are some examples of the kinds of actions you might like to try. But again, it's if it's not working, it might be because you've got some anger or frustration blocking and getting in the way. And I can't go through a whole course of self-compassion with you. If you want me to go through the ins and outs of it, I would have to come back and do a part two. But here are some ideas. So you can kind of place a kind hand on your chest, that kind of self-touch, and sort of soothe yourself. You can give yourself permission to let yourself rest and let go of the need to be productive. You know, hands up who struggles with that. I certainly do. I know that definitely on my high fatigue days, I can get really frustrated if I've had an expectation to, you know, meet a friend and do lots of laundry and get things done, and then I have to let go of that. And it often takes me a couple of hours where I will be sort of running around, fighting my body, fighting my body, fighting my body, feeling angry, feeling frustrated, until I get to a point where I'm mindful and I notice what's happening and I sort of say, I have to surrender to this. I have to give myself permission to rest and hold space for the disappointment that I wish I could do more. It's really hard to do. You can send yourself thoughts of care and understanding. I'm going to talk a little bit more about how you can do that. Um, you can seek out soothing touchstones. So for me, that's a cuddle with my dog, who's the light of my life. I'm sure lots of you have pets who you love as well. They're such amazing creatures when we're sick. Planting your feet in the grass, doing some grounding exercises, watching a nostalgic movie. For me, that's You've Got Mail, which is my favorite autumn movie to watch with Meg Ryan and Tom Hanks. And saying things like, it's not my fault that I'm flaring up, and at least trying to mean it most of the time. I'm just going to pause and check. Amazing film, Rosie says. Yes, it really is. The guilt when I have non-productive days is real. It's so hard, isn't it? Yeah. Somebody else says, who says, self-compassion for me might be thinking I might look a bit odd at times and or face plant in the flower bed, but that's okay. I'm doing things anyway and despite it. Yeah. And isn't that what you tell a friend that you kind of love? Yeah. That's really lovely. Absolutely. I love that Rosie's just said. I think self-compassion for me is accepting that if all I manage to do and achieve today is getting up and dressed, that's enough. My version of trying hard won't look the same as other people's. That's such a great point, Rosie. And I think for me, I'm really similar in that self-compassion for me sometimes looks like really reducing my expectations of myself. So I might have made a really long list of expectations, and then self-compassion might look like really letting go of that and saying, actually, today, all I might achieve is having a shower and wiping down the counters and taking my supplements and my meds and checking in with a friend I need to check in with so that I can stay aligned with my values of friendship and feeding my dog. And that's probably as much as I'm going to manage today. And that hurts and that sucks, but that's okay, and that's all I can manage, and that's not a bad thing, and I'm not lazy. Yeah. Um, okay, let's okay, so this is an exercise called the Self-Compassion Break by Kristen Neff, who's one of the two leading compassion researchers. I'm not going to completely guide you through this as a kind of meditative exercise, but I'm going to kind of talk you through how you can apply this to yourself. So and you can follow along if you want. It's a way of telling you, I've told you about what compassion is. This is a way of going, well, how do I actually do that in my everyday life? So this is one way. This is how you can use it in your everyday life. So what you want to do is in the moment kind of bring to mind an aspect of suffering related to your balance disorder. And I guess in the moment that might be really obvious because it might be something that's screaming out to you. So I guess to take some of the examples that just came up in the chat, you might be feeling really, really guilty or really ashamed that you're really struggling with productivity on a kind of high symptom day. So let's take that as an example. What you might do is kind of place a hand on your chest and just say, this is a moment of suffering. This is really tough. Okay, something along those lines. And what Kristen Neff says is that's mindfulness. That's when you're stepping out of being fused with the guilt and you're stepping back from your observer self and you're noticing it, you're naming it. Other options include saying, this is really hard. Anyone in my brain and body would find this hard. That's my favorite one that I use with myself. I kind of have that as a mantra because I know that all of you struggle with similar things that I struggle with. So anyone in my brain and body would find this hard. Ouch, this is stress. Or you can describe it in neutral language by using the I'm noticing that. So I'm noticing that I'm experiencing lightheadedness, for example, or I'm noticing that I'm experiencing real guilt, that I'm not being more productive. Just putting that in front of it, I'm noticing that means that you're not in it anymore. Okay, number two, saying, I know I'm not the only one. That's tapping into the second aspect, the common humanity. Other options include saying, other people feel this way, others are in the same boat. I'm not alone, even when I feel alone. Thousands of others are struggling with this too, or we are all struggling in this moment. And then finally, this is the kind of self-directed kindness. You can put your hands over your chest, feel that warmth kind of seep in through your clothes into your skin. You might want to even close your eyes and sort of rub in circles. Slow your breathing to a sort of soothing breathing rhythm and just say something like, may I be kind to myself. What's really nice about saying, may I be kind to myself, is that you're not forcing kindness. If you're not feeling it in that moment, you don't have to feel it. So you may not be feeling it, but you're kind of sending your body a wish to feel kindness. Another thing you can say is, I'm asking my anger to step back right now, or I'm asking my guilt to step back right now. and I'm sending a wish of kindness to myself. So it's sending yourself a wish of kindness. And I hope that makes sense. You don't have to force it on yourself if you're just not there in that moment. And other options are things like, may I find ease in my body? May I feel the compassion that I need today, even though I'm not feeling it right now? May my suffering and the suffering of others with balance disorders ease today? May I sleep well? May tomorrow be a better day? Or may I find hope even if I cannot find it right now? Because I think we all feel so hopeless when we're really overwhelmed with a flare up. Okay, let me just check on the chat quickly. It's coming through. Louise is saying that standing back from fear really helps her. Thank you, Louise. Bimla, the one thing I found difficult was to explain to people why I walk like a drunk. That's so hard, isn't it? I have friends who don't believe me, and at the same time, there are others who are really interested to find out about what I go through daily. It's so difficult, isn't it? Because I think we also, even if we have some friends who are just really kind and really compassionate, the friends who respond in a really unkind way, it hurts so badly that those comments or those responses are the ones that really sting and really stick with us. And I'm really sorry to hear that, Bimla. It's so, so difficult. Um, okay, thank you. Sorry if I've missed some things. We'll come back to it in the Q&A. Okay, we've come to the technical part. So those of you who are kind of a bit nerdy might enjoy this. Um, it's not going to take long, don't worry. So this is a little bit around some crude brain science around vestibular disorders and anxiety. So yes, what I want to talk a little bit is about the evolution of the brain and how that might link to our kind of fight or flight system. So what we need to understand is that the different parts of the brain are sort of millions of years old. And what we've got represented here for anyone who can't see the screen very clearly is that we've got this really old part of the brain that's actually kind of billions of years old in evolutionary terms, that evolved billions of years ago, that we share with lizards, with reptiles, with lots of other creatures. And then we have this part of the brain that's much newer, that evolved kind of millions of years ago rather than billions of years ago. And that part of the brain is kind of our prefrontal cortex at the forehead. It's much newer, and that's the kind of fancy stuff we can do, like rationality, reason, logic, that kind of stuff. I hope this makes sense so far. If not, I can answer more questions about it in the Q&A. But what's really important to know is that our fear response, our fight or flight response, is very, very primitive, and it's located in two parts of the brain mainly, the limbic system and the amygdala, the brainstem as well, which are really at the back of the brain in the oldest part of the brain. And they're very automatic, they're very primitive, and it's way at the back of the brain, right, in this old brain system. And that makes sense that we evolved that a long time ago, because every animal has a fight or flight response, a threat response. So if you think of an antelope who runs away from a lion, its response when it feels like it's under threat is a bit like our response when we experience a surge of anxiety or a panic attack. Okay, so it feels like, oh my God, I'm going to die. This is catastrophic. Its heart rate increases. Blood, it might feel lightheaded because blood leaves the brain and gets pumped to its limbs so it can run away quickly. It's thinking in kind of certainties, and it's flooded with cortisol and adrenaline so that it can run away because it's a catastrophe. Death is imminent. It's being chased by a lion. The only thing the body and the brain cares about there is the survival of the creature, the survival of the body, and getting you away. It doesn't care how horrendous you feel and how flooded you feel with anxiety. That's the function of anxiety from an evolutionary perspective. The problem with anxiety is that it's kind of like a really, really old car that has a dodgy car alarm. So that car alarm is going to go off if a thief comes up and rattles the car and is trying to steal something out of it. But the car alarm is also going to go off if the weather changes or if anything happens, really. It's just going to go off for loads of different reasons, even when the car is not in threat. And that's quite similar to the threat response and the fight or flight response. And what's really important to know is that we think that the vestibular system, the balance system, evolved to give us cues of danger as well. So if you think about it and you think, I'm going to give you a really silly example of a kind of primate sitting in a tree, for example, sleeping in a tree, and it's very rested, what would alert it to danger if a lion came along? That lion isn't going to roar, it's not going to hear that, it's not going to alert itself by kind of shouting that it's there. But what that primate or our ancestors might have felt if they're sleeping up that tree is they might have felt their balance go because they might have felt the tree shaking, or they might have felt some vibrations on the ground. Similarly, where our depth perception goes, that's sometimes a cue that we're walking on the edge of a cliff and we might fall over into a ravine. So our body thinks we're falling, we're about to die, or that we're sleeping in a cave and the ground is rattling because there's predators running towards us. So in terms of our ancestral environment, a loss of balance was often a cue that danger was present. And because of this, the balance system is also located in the old part of the brain. And it's very, very, very close the vestibular system is very, very close to the fight or flight system. It has a lot of connections with the fight or flight system. And we think that the vestibular system sort of naturally, very quickly sends signals to the fight or flight system that says, if we lose our balance, we must be in danger, we must be about to die, we must be in threat. Okay. So I guess a kind of another sort of, you don't need to put your hand up, but I guess, who here has felt in the throes of a vestibular episode that they might be about to die, that the anxiety has been that bad? You don't need to answer that question, just think about it. The reason for that might be because of the way the brain evolved. And who here has had a panic attack as a result of a really bad bout of vertigo? That again might be because of the way our brain is structured and the relationship between the balance system and the fight or flight system. And a really important message here is that where our kind of reason and logic center is at the front of the brain and the forehead, if you think of the back of the brain, some of you might want to do this, put your right hand at the base of your neck under where your hairline is, and put the front of your hand on your forehead. Think about how far away those are. That's how far away your fight or flight system is from the seat of rationality and logic. So in the moment, it's very, very difficult for you to reason your way out of your feelings of panic. So what you might have done before is you might have felt like so panicked that you think, I'm going to die, or I must have a serious illness. This must be MS, even though I've had a brain scan. And then rationality comes in and you say, no, I've had a brain scan and I've been diagnosed with Meniere's disease and I know that I'm not going to die. In fact, I've had this kind of room spinning vertigo like a million times before and I've never died before. But you might not feel any lowering of your anxiety when you say that to yourself. Has anyone had that experience? You can let me know in the chat of kind of trying to reason yourself out of it in the moment and it just having zero effect. Or you might feel like, oh my God, I think I'm going to pass out. I'm going to humiliate myself. And even though you've had that thought, I'm going to pass out 5,000 times before, you might say to yourself, but I've never fainted as a result of a vestibular episode. I might have fainted because of the flu before, or when I was a child and I was dehydrated and overheated, but I've never fainted as a result of a vestibular disorder. But the fear of fainting doesn't go away. You still feel terrified of passing out. So in the moment, it's really, really difficult to reason your way out of the panic you feel. I'm just going to check the chat and see, does that resonate with people? My first violent vertigo attack, I truly thought I was dying from Kevin. Yeah, I'm sure this does resonate with people. Uh, yeah, someone's saying I knew in inverted commas I had a range of horrendous neurological disorders. Yeah, because it's kind of like, how could I feel this bad and not be dying, right? You know, it doesn't make sense. So, what does this mean? That was all very technical. The technical bit is over. What it means is that anxiety may be a natural consequence of experiencing vertigo and imbalance. And I want to tell you what I wanted to hear from my providers at that time, which I did from my neurootologist, who is amazing and who I have to credit this knowledge to. He explained this to me, and then I did more research into it. Um, because you experience anxiety, that doesn't mean the anxiety caused the vestibular disorder, and it doesn't mean you have a mental illness, okay? It's not your fault and you're not going crazy. You also might not be able to reason your way out of it in the moment. Anyone in your brain and body would feel similarly. And it's important to know that your brain is actually doing its job, okay? We inherited these tricky brains from an evolutionary purpose that think that when we are experiencing vertigo, we are unsafe. Again, it's kind of like that dodgy car alarm. It's just going off anytime it thinks there's a thief going by. It's going off when there's a shadow. It's going off when there's a rain cloud. It's going off when there's a storm. It's going off when there's a thief. It's kind of just anytime it thinks that it might be in danger, it's going off. And it's wrong most of the time, but it's trying to keep us safe. So even if we logically know we're safe in our beds, we might emotionally feel terrified. And it's really important to validate that this makes sense to our bodies, even if it's not strictly true that we're in danger. So invalidating ourselves and saying, I'm just being stupid, is only going to make us feel worse. Okay. So this might leave you with the question, well, if I can't reason my way out of it, what the hell can I do? Which is a really good question. So what we can do is we can send safety signals to our brain in the language that the brain understands. This is kind of like learning Morse code to communicate with our brain. So it doesn't understand rationality. It doesn't understand logic. It certainly doesn't understand bullying and invalidation. But what it does understand is self-soothing. And we essentially, slightly technical again, but we have two different types of nervous systems. The sympathetic nervous system, which is activated when our fight or flight response is activated, and the parasympathetic nervous system, which is a network of nerves throughout our bodies that soothes our whole system. It's kind of like a fire going off and then this cooling blanket on the fire, okay? So activating the parasympathetic nervous system is kind of like a language the body understands. And it's a way of sending the body a message that says, it's okay, I am safe, even though I feel unsafe right now. So again, I would have to do an entire course on this to kind of explain how to do this, but some examples of how you can send safety signals to the brain are here. Again, I want to be really clear. It's about the quality of how you relate to yourself whilst you're doing this. So you can try and go and do grounding and plant your feet in the grass and think this is stupid and this isn't going to work and not be mindful. And that's not going to count. If you do it in a way that is with a quality of kindness and mindfulness, then that's probably going to really help. So these are some examples. You can slow the breath. When we're in a fight or flight, we don't even realize it, but our breathing speeds up and we breathe from our chest. If we breathe really slowly from our diaphragm, we kind of send this message that there are no predators around, nobody's in danger, nobody's going to die, everything's okay. Our body understands the language of the breath. We can do mindfulness. We can practice that regularly. If anyone manages to do mindfulness every day, please let me know. You'll go into the Guinness Book of Records because I haven't been able to do it. My clients haven't been able to do it. It's really hard to keep it up as a habit. But if you can do it semi-regularly, it's amazing for your brain. We know that it's incredible for your brain and your body. Listening to relaxing music and other relaxing sounds. So you can listen to classical music. That's the one that's the most researched. It's called the Mozart effect, as kind of really calming the body down. My favorite sounds to listen to are actually just listening to recordings of birdsong, which can be really grounding as well. Compassionate touch can be really helpful. If you can afford things like reflexology and massage, they can be amazing. If you can't, you can do some self-touch, like massaging your own hand or getting some nice creams, massaging your face every night, that kind of thing. Compassionate self-talk, which we've kind of talked about with the self-compassion break. Mindful connection to nature and grounding exercises like planting your feet in the ground, a little bit like this woman lying in the grass and bathing in sunlight. Really important to get some outside time in nature every day if you're able to. And stimulating a nerve in the body called the vagus nerve. So that really relaxes us. It's a nerve that's involved in the soothing system. It's the biggest nerve in the body. And if any of you use gamma core, which is can be helpful for vestibular migraine, that counts for that. But there are other ways that you can look up quite easily. Okay. So I'm just going to give some more examples of sending compassionate wishes and messages to our bodies before we start wrapping up. So just some reminders of kind of ideas that you can take away in case you want to write some of these down or remember them. So may I find ease in my body today. Anyone in my brain and body would find this hard. This is tough. Anyone would find this tough. I'm noticing that my critic is active today. I'm asking it to take a step back. I'm noticing that I'm having the thought that I'm just lazy. May this thought pass. I give myself permission to rest. I hold space for my disappointment that I cannot do more, but tomorrow is another day. And I'm noticing that I'm feeling hopeless today. May this feeling pass when it is ready. May I feel hopeful again soon. Okay. So as we come to the end, I want to come back to the thoughts for reflection that we had at the beginning of the presentation. And I want you to just notice if there's been any shift as we've come through. It's okay if there isn't. But I want you to just check in with how you're feeling towards your body now after we've gone through this presentation and we've gone through these ideas. So just think in your own mind, how would you describe how you're feeling towards your body in this moment at the end of this presentation? And if you notice any shift, what is that shift for you? And just think about what kind of relationship would you like to have with your body in 6 months' time? And what are some of the steps that you could use to get there? Some of the ideas you could take from this presentation. They don't have to be complex. You can just take some baby steps. Okay, final thoughts to leave you with. I want to say to you what I really hoped a professional would say to me when I was going through the worst part of my journey, which is that living inside a body with a vestibular imbalance disorder is incredibly hard. And if you're finding it hard, it's because it is hard. It's not because you're doing anything wrong or you're crazy or you're neurotic. It's just because it's really difficult. Compassionate self-soothing cannot fill the hole that you deserve to have filled by other people's care, understanding, and validation. Okay, that has to come alongside. We need that. It's a fundamental need. It's a relational need. But what it can do is it can help stop or at the very least slow that vicious cycle where we sort of perpetuate our own distress by criticizing ourselves, being unkind to ourselves, bullying ourselves, gaslighting ourselves. And what we tend to do is then inadvertently escalate our fight or flight responses. And this causes a cascade of stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, which keeps our brains in a fight or flight loop. That's not to say that that's the cause of our balance disorder or that we've caused our own flare-ups, but it's just to say that if we think of our kind of stress bucket and our thresholds, that can kind of either lower or raise our thresholds depending on where we're at. And therefore the alternative is that soothing ourselves, being compassionate to ourselves can help manage that threshold for us. Compassionate self-soothing cannot cure vestibular disorders, okay? And if anyone tells you they can cure your vestibular disorder with some magic bullet, then you need to run in the other direction. But this is just one approach that can help us reduce our suffering and improve our quality of life. And by befriending our bodies and minds, we can live in greater ease with ourselves. So alongside other really important approaches like this support group, community support, eliciting support from our friends and family in the right way, and of course the right medical treatment, sometimes the right psychological treatment as well. Compassionate self-soothing can help us live a life worth living inside our bodies rather than in battle with them. Okay, that's it. So I'll finish there.
That was brilliant, Anna. Thank you so much. I'm just going to stop the screen sharing, get back to the gallery. Fabulous. I don't say this every meeting, but this one I've learned so much myself. New terminology, ableism, love it. And it's a lovely example there where some days we're able-bodied, other days we just can't get out of bed. And it is so difficult to deal with that. And I love the overall message. Something I've been talking about for a few years is that if we can't be kind to ourselves, no one else is going to be. We've got to start with ourselves and understand. I think that one great thing you said, where you discover it's not your fault. It is not our fault we have these conditions. We never asked for it. We've never done something wrong and deserve it. It's just not our fault. But truly, my own experience, on the one hand, was the medical experts, the treatments, the drugs, the trying things. But I'd say a good 50% of my coming through it was learning how to adapt my mind, how to use it in that more positive way, and being kind to myself. Yeah. And that's something hopefully will come up in the question and answers. I think with anything, learning to ride a bike, drive a car, walking for the first time, we all have to practice and train at it. And I think a lot of ground you've covered today, I think will be just the same. The more we practice, the more we try, the more we make that effort, even though it might not seem to work for the first day, week, month, you keep trying at it, persevere, it will come. It took me ages to realize it didn't matter what other people thought when they saw me wobbling down the road or wobbling in a meeting in an office. It didn't matter. But it takes an awful lot of time to get to that place where you realize it doesn't matter. But it's such a freeing process, the freedom you get from it all. So brilliant, thanks ever so much. If we can put a copy of your slideshow and download it as a PDF for the members after the meeting, great. No problem. So we can refer to that. And this, of course, will all be on video and available for us to re-watch it at any time. So, Kelly, can I hand over to you now for chairing of question and answers? And I think we normally start with saying the first question, you can either put a sign on your Zoom with a hand up, or you can physically put your hand up and Kelly will get round to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Kevin. So, yep, the floor is open to all of you. So I am ready, I'm poised, I'm ready to send over the questions to Dr. Hannah. So, who wants to go first?
Come on, don't be shy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, can I ask a question?
And is that Naomi?
Yeah, speaking.
Yeah, absolutely, Naomi. Please go ahead.
I wanted to see how often I have vestibular migraines, but balance disorders are confused with neurological disorders, because I keep basically I'm in a conflict with two specialists, one that's saying I have vestibular migraines and another one that's saying I have functional neurological disorder, and kind of pushing that on me and then just not taking the migraine into account at all. Is it quite common that they will tell you like it's and I also have endometriosis, so they're kind of saying those things are what's my issue, not so much the vestibular, but I'm certain it's the vestibular. That's why I come to the support group, because everything resonates with me, whereas the FND and other bits not so much. I understand that my endo will trigger my vestibular episodes, but yeah, is it common to be pushed between the two, can they both exist at the same time? Like, yeah, what's your advice around that? Thanks.
I'm really sorry to hear about that, Naomi. I guess it's really difficult for me to answer that because I only work with vestibular clients kind of privately in my private practice. I don't work in a balance clinic, so I don't know how common it is for people to be labeled with functional neurological conditions, but I have heard of it happening. Um, and I'm really sorry to hear that that's happening to you. If that feels inaccurate, I can only imagine how profoundly invalidating that must feel, how frustrating, and particularly to have your expertise as the person who has the experience of living that condition kind of dismissed. And I guess there's a lot of stigma along with functional neurological conditions, isn't there? And kind of stereotypes around what that means, which can be very, very painful to take on. I know you also mentioned that you had endometriosis, and I guess whilst we're talking about ableism, another kind of element of that to mention is how women can end up being treated as well in the healthcare system, and how women's issues can be sort of minimized or invalidated. So I can only imagine that's having a huge impact on you. I'm sorry I can't answer how common it is, but I guess if you're feeling like if any of you feel like the doctor that you're working with it isn't the right one for you, if you feel like they're not taking you seriously, if you feel like your voice isn't being heard, or if you're coming away from appointments feeling invalidated or feeling stigmatized or feeling like something isn't quite right in some way, I guess you have the right to kind of politely raise that and request a transfer to somebody else. It's very, very difficult to name that in the power dynamic, and it can bring up a kind of fear of being labeled as a difficult patient. But you deserve to get the kind of you deserve a second opinion firstly, but you deserve to be treated by somebody who's going to listen to you and take your opinion seriously. So I'm sorry, I don't know more about the kind of statistics. I don't know more about it because I don't work kind of specifically in a balance clinic in the NHS. But yeah, just to say I'm really sorry that that's happening to you.
Hannah, if
Yeah,
I
thank you.
just add the experience we've had over the years with the support group, many members have come in, as you can with balance conditions, can come from lots of different beginnings of the journey, head trauma, various neuro conditions, vestibular conditions. A common thing that's reported by many members is it could be the neuro consultant will be telling them they haven't got a vestibular problem, or it can be a vestibular consultant. And our advice, given what most members report, that it takes them years to finally discover they wish they'd spoken to another consultant in that other field. Our advice is, where you can, do get second opinions or first opinions from a different type of consultant, because these conditions do overlay and it's so difficult to know where they're coming from. But if you're not talking to a vestibular expert, it's going to be really difficult for anyone to identify you have got a vestibular problem. And saying all that, I know this is so difficult at the moment. If you're in the UK under the NHS, to get to speak to a consultant is really hard. Those that can just afford private consultations, I know of so many cases where they've come to the group and our general advice is just don't sit there and accept it. We are experts in our own bodies. And often you can be there thinking, this just isn't right. They're telling me this. They've been telling me this for years. Nothing's getting better. Listen to yourself. And if you can, seek that other opinion and expert advice. The worst that can happen is they say, no, we're pretty sure you haven't got X. But there's so many occasions members have wished they'd done something years ago because they're now back on the right route to a correct treatment and recovery. So that's just general, and I know we're
Yeah.
all on different journeys.
I agree with all of that, Kevin, and I think naming that people have different access to services is really important. I would also name that if that is the wrong diagnosis for you, Naomi, you may be left with a lot of really difficult feelings as a result of that, which is completely normal. But yeah, as Kevin says, a neurologist is an expert in sort of functional disorders, but a neurootologist, I guess, is the person who would be an expert in vestibular disorders or balance conditions. I don't know, Kevin, would you agree with that?
Yeah, and
Yeah,
again, sadly, I can only report what we are told by many members. Finding good experts,
yeah,
I saw in the chat people who will actually listen. It's not easy, and especially in the vestibular field in the UK, there are too few good people doing that. I saw a comment. I think someone was asking about what GPs can do. Generally, GPs, doctors in the UK get little to no training on anything to do with balance conditions. And sadly, the most common response from a GP, and this is a generalization, is go away, you've probably got a virus, you'll be better in 2 weeks.
yeah,
That's all they know. And then when you come back and it's not getting better, you do get referred into the system. But it's incredibly difficult. And again, as you mentioned earlier, you can have a whole meeting on various subjects. We could have a whole meeting on how difficult it is to access the correct treatment.
yeah,
And I have to say it's getting worse. It's not getting better. But
yeah.
again, this is where the group's here to try and steer people in the right direction. But general message from our group is don't sit there when
No.
you're not happy. Work out what can you do, what are your options,
And listen to your gut, and I guess Naomi, if they want to diagnose you with FND, they might sort of recommend that a psychologist can cure that for you. So just be aware that that might be suggested. And I guess what you can counter to that is, you might say something like, I'm really happy to see a psychologist or a therapist because what I'm going through has been really stressful, but I also really want to pursue investigating whether there's kind of medical treatment that I could take alongside that. So there's ways of kind of advocating for yourself as well, but I'm really sorry that you're going through that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your question there, Naomi. It was really helpful in terms of the discussion it's then prompted, so thank you. Louise, I can see you've got a hand up. If you want to unmute yourself and ask your question to Hannah. I can see you've unmuted yourself, Louise, but I'm not hearing anything. Louise, are you still there?
we move on, Kelly, and come
Yeah.
back to Louise later.
Yeah, we'll
That's
come
okay.
back to you, Louise, if you come on. Okay, Diana, I did see that you had your hand up, but you've taken it down. So I just want to check. Do you want to ask a question? If so, you need to unmute yourself, sweetheart.
Right. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Diana. Go for it.
Thank you. I wanted to ask Hannah a question. I'm not sure it falls under the sort of self-compassion remit, but I have balance condition, as we all have, but it is constant. I don't have flare-ups, but I am constantly feeling woozy, unsteady.
Mm-hmm.
I have a feeling I'm going to fall over. And I'm also sort of quite surprised sometimes when my legs don't go where I want them.
Mm-hmm.
I churn this over all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Day in, day out, it goes on and on and on. What can I do? And I'm almost explaining it again over and over to some mythical person.
Mm-hmm.
And how do I stop? How do I stop this? How do I accept it? That's really what I need to know. Can I accept it?
Gosh, Diana, my heart goes out to you. And I'm so sorry that you're going through this. I think it's so difficult, and I think this is where, there's limits to what we can say, and it's really important not to push yourself too much, because sometimes we need to kind of give ourselves space to be in a place where it's just really bloody hard. Um, and I don't want to kind of give you advice that sounds like it's kind of coming from the toxic positivity movement of saying, just be positive and just be accepting and don't think about it and just get on with it, because you're 24/7 debilitated. And I know that there are times for me or there have been times in the past where my symptoms have been so high and so overwhelming that I could throw all the psychological tools in the world at myself, and it kind of breaches my window of psychological tolerance. It sort of feels too much, um, which is incredibly difficult. So just to say that if you're sort of struggling to find a place of acceptance right now, I want to kind of name that that's human. It's completely understandable given how severe and how debilitating your symptoms are. So I don't want to suggest that it's kind of easy. I also don't want to suggest that you're stuck with it and that there's nothing you can do either. And it's kind of difficult to sort of throw tools and ideas at you without them sounding kind of glib or easy, I guess, at the same time. Um, and I suppose it's part of a holistic plan of thinking, which we can't necessarily do right now, but thoughts to reflect on are how much support do you have? Do you have a plan in terms of medical treatment? You don't need to answer these questions, but those are the things that I would be wondering about, is how stuck do you feel? And I guess, Diana, it may be helpful to think about, some psychological support if you can access that as well, to think about kind of untangling that with somebody else. I suppose when we get into a space of sort of justifying ourselves to a mythical person or having these hypothetical conversations with somebody, it's often because we're really crying out for a sense of understanding that we're not getting from the people around us, or that we're trying to make sense of something that's just impossible to make sense of. And so I guess I wonder where you can get that, where you can kind of get that need met for yourself. I suppose another thing is, if there are small ways in which you can clarify what your most important values are in your life, and you can find a way of somehow connecting with them. Maybe you're doing that already. It might look very different from the way you connected with them before. But for example, if you used to love going hiking, you might not be able to go hiking, but can you connect with nature in smaller ways by, going out into the garden, sitting in the back garden and looking at the clouds? For me, at the height of mine, it was just sort of, sitting at the window and looking out the window, or going on a really slow walk around the park. If it's kind of connecting with friends and family, it might be sending messages to them. So those are little things that you can do to kind of get yourself out of your mind for pockets of the day. And it might be about pulling in support. I guess acceptance, I don't think it's a sort of a destination. It's something we kind of move towards, and we kind of move in and out of a space of acceptance depending on what's going on for us at any one time. I know that's probably not a neat answer, but I don't know what comes up for you as I say that.
My husband is absolutely brilliant, and he understands, but I don't think anybody else understands. And that's where I think I'm doing this constant explaining to her. I think I want this group actually playing in my mind. I think, if everybody was there in my head, because everybody understands I can't get I can't get appointments or anything to see anybody else. And if I may, it's a quick one to Kevin here. Is there possibility that we can actually have recommendations of private people that people have seen that
Absolutely. We operate something called Members Appeals, where we put one out recently for somebody who's living in the Kent region, and they asked if members knew or could recommend names.
Right.
Those recommendations, remember, they're coming from just fellow dizzy people.
Yeah.
And the other thing to bear in mind is one person can love one consultant and another person may dislike them. So it's really difficult. One point I wanted to pick up on, Deanna, when you were first asked the question, I wondered whether some of that was getting into something which they call hypervigilance, which is quite normal for us, where I did it. I have many years, and my early years, the moment I gained consciousness in the morning, I was doing a self-diagnostic check. Could I balance? And that was before I got out of bed. And then every minute I was checking my mind, was I feeling any weird surgery? And it's so tiring and exhausting to be constantly monitoring. And the only thing that cured me, and this maybe just being me, when I realized I'd spent the first few years doing this daily, hourly, every minute, and it hadn't helped one jot. It hadn't helped me deal with anything. It hadn't helped me understand anything. And it was realizing how counterproductive it was, just making me so tired, so anxious all the time. I tried, and it may sound a bit weird, I tried to give myself a holiday. I tried certain days to go, right, do not think about balance, imbalance, vertigo attacks, anything. Just give yourself a rest. And slowly I got to get more holidays. And now these days I just do not think of it. But it's easy to say that after many, many years. But I would say generally to most people, if you find you're watching every step, every second, be aware you are wearing yourself out. And if there's no real benefit to that, then maybe it's time to try and find techniques that such as that can teach us. How do we get out of that trap?
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm trying to do my best.
Yeah, thank you for your question, Diana. I'm sure everyone will relate to it. I certainly don't feel that I've ever reached a place where I'm completely accepting. So I just want to share that and normalize it. And particularly, I think there's a correlation when my symptoms are higher, I'm very resistant and less accepting. So yeah, I hope that it gets easier for you.
Thank you, Hannah.
Okay, so Louise has come in on the chat because she's been having some technical difficulties, as we've all been there with these Zoom calls. And her question was about using and accessing CBT. So CBT, for those that don't know, will be cognitive behavioural therapy, I would assume, especially specifically tailored CBT for triple PD. She's put that she's a retired NHS clinical psychologist, so like Hannah, has been in the fortunate position of being able to access information and use it to herself, which she's grateful for. But having said that, it's also doubly embarrassing as a psychologist to be anxious, self-vigilant, using negative thoughts, etc., because I should know better, shouldn't I?
Yeah. So I just responded a little bit to Louise in the chat. It's great to have a fellow psychologist here. I guess I would just say, Louise, I think we're so harsh on ourselves as clinical psychologists, and we kind of have this pressure on ourselves to be sort of psychologically perfect. And I think it's really important to let ourselves off the hook, because we're human. We're going to struggle. We're going to have difficult emotions as well. And I don't think anyone who has a balance disorder doesn't experience difficult emotions. So, you know, we're human, we're in the same boat as everybody else. But I know that when I initially was not diagnosed, when I first was in the throes of it and I didn't know what was happening, I carried so much extra shame because I didn't know what was happening. I thought I was having a mental breakdown, and I felt such kind of self-stigma because I felt like I'm supposed to be a psychologist. I'm supposed to have it together for everyone else. So I really hear that, Louise. There is a CBT on the NHS. It tends to be tailored for people with physical health difficulties in general. And there tends to be an awareness in sort of, you know, primary care mental health services, for example, of kind of chronic pain conditions, that kind of thing. My sense, unfortunately, is that the majority of clinical psychologist services unless they're attached to a specialized balance clinic, which would be the minority, do not have a good understanding of what the lived experience is of somebody with a balance condition, and may misunderstand it a little bit. So the idea that there's kind of widespread CBT that's very tailored and specialized for people with triple PD or Meniere's or vestibular migraine, unfortunately, is a fantasy that we can all one day hope is realized into a reality. I think it comes back to kind of, was it Kevin was saying that GPs don't understand about it? Psychologists don't tend to either. Certainly my psychologist friends, when I've tried to educate them about what I haven't seemed to have heard about it. And when I was doing my training, you know, we were taught about physical health conditions. We were taught about chronic pain. We were taught about working with cancer. We certainly weren't taught about working with balance conditions. So unless somebody goes and ends up being a health psychologist who specializes in working in a balance clinic, then those practitioners would be fairly few and far between. So I don't want to leave that on a kind of hopeless note. I know people have picked up that there are more and more people who really want to develop that. And I think because really sadly with long COVID, balance disorders are becoming more common. I think people with lived experience will really become passionate about this. And there's a psychologist in the States, Emily Kostelnik, who's developing stuff over there and kind of courses for people globally and things like that. There's a lot of people starting to work privately who are quite passionate about this as well. And I just really hope that this becomes more common. But yeah, we can only hope. And Louise, if you want to message me about this privately, you know, maybe we can talk about it. Yeah, thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Hannah. So I've got I can see 2 more hands up, and then we'll look at maybe wrapping the Q&A session up, because you know we've been here a while now. We don't want to be here all day. As Hannah said, we've all got lives to get back to. So I don't know your name, I apologise, but you are coming up on my screen as Lorraine's iPad. So the gentleman that's in my screen that's on that, go ahead with your question. You've been waiting ever so patiently, so thank you.
Yeah, that's right. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, that's right. Yeah, I'm actually using my other half's iPad.
Yeah, I'd assumed so.
Okay. Just to try very quickly, because I don't want to take up too much time. Yeah, I echo what Kevin has had to say about importance of diagnosis, and then linking that with what Hannah's been saying. Namely, my attack was at first diagnosed as labyrinthitis, but then subsequently and ultimately with Prof. Ray being diagnosed as vestibular neuritis. And I'm not sure how many of the group have actually got that specific condition, but as we already know, there's a spectrum of so many different balance disorders. But I found what Hannah's been saying very helpful in how to deal with it. I just want to like see if it makes sense to add another layer to that. In the vestibular neuritis is a damage, as I'm sure most of you know, to the vestibular nerve itself. And if that vestibular nerve isn't functioning properly, then there's a physiological factor involved as well as a behavioural or psychological factor. And so while physiotherapy exercises are good for me, and having the right attitude to it, which Hannah's explained to us already, I find physiological things affect me. Food, hydration, tiredness, cold, as well as the, as I say, the behavioural psychological things. And the thing I find mostly is what was said is that you have to react to it. You have to let yourself rest and just accept that you're going to have to step down a gear or something equivalent to that. So that's my point, and I don't know whether Hannah's got a comment for that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think speaking now with my hat on kind of as a vestibular patient rather than as a psychologist, I think my experience and most people's experience is that it's so holistic. And that's why I would say if anyone comes along and says, oh, just try this and it will fix it all, I would say run in the other direction, right? Because I don't know, I can't speak for people with different diagnoses to me, but my experience managing vestibular migraine has been that it takes targeting so many different routes. So it's kind of managing my own psychology, my mind, it's been medication, it's been supplements, it's been diet and hydration, as you say, it's been behavioral, it's been physiotherapy. That can feel really overwhelming. But it is this holistic way of kind of relating to mind and body, as I think you're saying. And I've never come across anyone who said, I just tried this one thing and it fixed everything. You know, often it's kind of multiple pathways to wellness that help us kind of move forward. And yeah, it certainly is so multifaceted, isn't it? Thank you for your comment. It's really important. And that's why if anyone tells you, you know, you're crazy and you just need to see a psychiatrist or you just need to see a psychologist, you know, as a psychologist, I will tell you that's kind of weaponizing mental health in a way that's really stigmatizing. And of course, seeing a psychologist can be really helpful and an incredibly important part of anyone's recovery. But it's not the only part, and you should never, that's not a fair way of characterizing it. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Hannah.
I think Nikki had her hand up as well. I don't know if she put her hand down, if she wants to speak.
Hi, I did originally. My question was actually exactly the same as Diana's because I over-explain a lot as well. So I was wondering if you have any tips on that, as I'm aware, as you said, it comes quite a lot from the misunderstanding. But I guess following up on what you were saying before, maybe I would be like wondering if you have any thoughts on perhaps how to communicate things better about your condition to your friends and others, and how to advocate for yourself a bit better so it would kind of lead a bit less to be misunderstood and then over explaining yourself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you, Nikki. I think probably most of us can relate to this. I certainly can. It's really difficult. I'm sure other people can jump in with this as well, not just me. And this is again me kind of answering from my own experience. I think for me, it was sort of helpful to kind of even draw and literally draw out a circle of the people I kind of want in my circle, to sort of advocate with, and the people who maybe are a bit unreachable, who maybe I'll let go of trying to explain things to. So we all know we might have that cousin or that sister or that, you know, acquaintance who we kind of over explain ourselves to, who maybe will never understand. And that's just going to lead us to feel really crap about ourselves if we keep telling ourselves, if we keep talking to them about our health condition. So it might be about protecting ourselves with that person. And if they say something like, oh, why are you wearing those funny glasses? You might just dodge the comment in some way, because it's actually just going to open up kind of pain and hurt. For me, what I did, and I know I spoke to Kevin about this, was that I actually asked 3 of the closest people in my life to come along to a Zoom consultation with my doctor, and I asked him to explain my condition to them. I sort of demanded that they come along. Actually, I sort of said, here's the date, here's the Zoom link. I really need you to come along. And then I asked my doctor to just explain the impact of vestibular migraine. And that was really helpful, I think, for me. So I think it's about kind of naming who are the people that you have in your life who you really, it's important to you that they really get an understanding. And if you can, it might be helpful to kind of proactively sit down with them outside of a moment of being triggered, maybe when you're feeling quite well in yourself, and say, hey, can I talk to you about this? It's really important to me that you know, understand what's going on for me. The other thing that was really helpful for me was sharing Kimberly Warner's documentaries, the Unfixed documentaries that shared about the lived experience of people with balance disorders. And just sitting down and watching them with them and saying, it would really mean a lot to me if you just watch 20 minutes of this. It's not very long, it's not very taxing. I'm not asking you to read a book, but could you just watch it with me? And that would be really helpful. So it's just asking them to engage with it to some degree, where I'm not having to do the explaining, but I'm actually asking somebody else to sort of represent me on my behalf in a way. You might even invite someone who matters to you to come along to this group and listen to an expert speak or hear about other people. I guess in narrative therapy, we call it kind of witnessing. So you're sort of getting them to witness other people's reports of how impactful vestibular migraine or whatever it may be for you might be, without you having to continuously sort of over explain yourself. So for me, that's what I found to be helpful, but I don't know how that lands with you, Nikki.
I think that's really helpful, especially hearing this from your experience. And I think they're definitely all good suggestions. I think I will try and implement this with my friends and family. I think I think you're right that it's better to just ask them before something actually happens, and they do something that something that may trigger some symptoms. So yeah, I think that's really helpful, and thank you so much for sharing your story today as well. I think it was really great.
No problem.
Hannah, if I can add again feedback from members over the years, getting your partner, family, bring them to this meeting. It's not a problem. Get them to sit in with it. It's always better if it's not you telling your loved ones or family that, as you say, this witnessing that. So many members have come back and said, "Oh, I got my husband to watch a video, an old meeting video. He now knows it's not just me." That's one of the most common things that is said. Because up to that point, all that your partner has ever known, anyone with a balance condition, is just you. And then there's always this doubt, well, is it a real thing? Is it in your head? And this suddenly seeing all of us sharing all this, how serious this really is, how devastating, how it literally and mentally turns your life upside down. When they see that happening in lots of other people, I think the most common reaction is to be almost apologetic that they didn't take it seriously before. So definitely, whichever form it is, old videos, Kimberly Warner's videos are brilliant. I'll put a link up for those in a minute. Or just bring them to the meeting, Nikki. I want to see your whole family and all your friends crowded in your camera at the next meeting. Thanks very much.
Brilliant. Well, I think that is it for our Q&A for this afternoon. So thank you so much for everybody who has put their questions to Hannah, and thank you, Hannah, so graciously for answering them where you've been able to. Just a reminder, Kevin will also let me know, but there's lots of interesting chat been happening today in the chat box. Kevin, will you be saving it and sending it out in the email?
Yes, you will get an email with links to the video to this meeting, and in the same email will be a link to download the chat transcript. There'll also be another link to download Hannah's presentation, so you'll have everything there. So don't panic.
Fabulous. There you go.
Super. So just before you all dash off, because I can sense there's lots of crossed legs out there. Next meeting is 9th of December, Christmas special. It's a panel of experts that cover everything to do with balance, so don't miss it. The only requirement, you have to wear a silly Christmas jumper or hat or Santa beards, whatever, but you've got to do something silly. So that's 9th of December. Just to mention, if you're new, join the member-to-member network. You can get to email, text, message fellow members and carry on lots of conversations like you've had today. If you are stuck on anything, look at your Balance Buddy contact sheet and get talking to us. Ask us questions. There's no such thing as a stupid question. So email me, message me, whatever. Finally, we're going to send out a members survey form where we need your feedback. It's your group. We want to know what else can we be doing. What would you like to hear about? What would you like to talk about? What can we do in a better way? And we always have this, new members won't know of this, but we have the annual awards, Life on the Level annual awards. and they are known as the Dizzies. They are rarer, harder to win than an Oscar. So we'll be asking you to vote on those as well. That's all got to happen before the 9th of December. But thanks so much, Anna. It's been a pleasure. I am sure we're going to get you back for part 2, part 3, and part 4 over the coming months and years. But that was brilliant. Thanks so much for sharing your story. It just is so, it's, I think, reaffirming for others to hear how you've gone through your journey, and it just comforts us all that we are not alone. We all are suffering the same things. And amazingly enough, guys, there's 1,001 different balance conditions, but we all, I think we have 80–90% commonality of what happens because of those symptoms. So we might carry different diagnoses, but we've all got so much in common. Thanks ever so much. All take care.
Thank you all. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
So, all
Bye.
have fun.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.